April 12, 1945. The air in the German state of Thuringia was crisp, carrying the faint, deceptive promise of spring across a landscape that had been utterly shattered by years of total war. The United States Third Army, a massive, unstoppable mechanized juggernaut commanded by General George S. Patton, was tearing through the crumbling remnants of the Third Reich. By this point in the war, the American soldier had seen every conceivable horror of the battlefield. They had fought through the hedgerows of Normandy, survived the freezing, blood-soaked forests of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, and witnessed the total destruction of European cities. But nothing, absolutely nothing in the annals of human conflict or the dark corners of the human imagination, could have prepared them for what they found hidden in the thick forests near the town of Gotha. It was a place called Ohrdruf, a subcamp of the Buchenwald concentration camp network, and it was the first Nazi death camp to be liberated by American forces. What happened there on that specific April morning, and the ruthless, unprecedented psychological warfare that General Patton unleashed upon the captured Nazi officials who dared to look upon their own handiwork with arrogant indifference, remains one of the most powerful and heavily suppressed chapters of the Second World War. Before we step through the gates of Ohrdruf and witness exactly how General Patton broke the minds of the SS officers who thought they had outsmarted the world, I need you to understand the absolute gravity of this moment in history. If you believe that the harsh, unfiltered truth of the past must be preserved no matter how uncomfortable it makes the modern world, hit that subscribe button right now. We do not sanitize history on this channel. We look directly into the darkest abysses of human nature and the uncompromising commanders who forced the world to see the truth. Type the word justice in the comments right now if you are ready to see what happens when the absolute evil of the Nazi regime collides with the unyielding volcanic rage of George S. Patton. To understand the profound psychological collision that occurred at Ohrdruf, you first have to understand the mindset of the captured SS officers and Nazi Party officials in the final weeks of the war. According to the interrogation reports and military police logs of the United States Third Army, as the German front collapsed, thousands of high-ranking Nazi officials, camp administrators, and SS commanders surrendered to the advancing Americans. Many of these men did not surrender with the broken, defeated posture of a conquered enemy. Instead, they surrendered with a chilling, bureaucratic arrogance. They were well-fed, their uniforms were meticulously tailored, and they carried themselves with the deeply ingrained superiority of the Nazi ideology. When interrogated by American intelligence officers, these men routinely denied any knowledge of atrocities. They claimed they were merely soldiers fighting a conventional war, administrative clerks, or supply officers. They hid behind the polite rules of the Geneva Convention, demanding the respect and formal protocols owed to prisoners of war. And worst of all, according to the first-hand accounts of the American interrogators, many of these captured SS officers carried a faint, imperceptible smirk. A silent, mocking arrogance born from the belief that they had successfully wiped away the evidence of their crimes, and that the naive, civilized Americans would simply process them as normal prisoners, completely ignorant of the industrial-scale slaughter that had been taking place just a few miles away from their pristine command posts. But that smirk, that impenetrable wall of Nazi arrogance, was about to be shattered into a million pieces. On the morning of April 12, General Patton arrived at the gates of Ohrdruf alongside the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and General Omar Bradley. Patton was a warrior in the most classical, ancient sense of the word. He believed in the honor of the battlefield, the glory of combat, and the sacred bond between soldiers. He had spent his entire life studying warfare, and he believed he understood the absolute limits of human cruelty. He was wrong. According to the historical memoirs of General Omar Bradley, the smell of Ohrdruf hit the American generals miles before they even saw the barbed wire. It was a thick, suffocating stench of disease, starvation, and unburied death that clung to the inside of their lungs. When Patton, Eisenhower, and Bradley finally walked through the iron gates, the reality of the Nazi master plan was laid bare in front of them. The camp was a nightmare of staggering proportions. Emaciated bodies were stacked like cordwood. Survivors, who looked more like walking skeletons than human beings, weakly approached the American generals, their eyes hollow and completely devoid of hope. General Patton, a man who had fearlessly walked through artillery barrages and directed tank battles while standing fully exposed to enemy fire, physically broke down. According to the official after-action reports and the personal diaries of the officers present, the sight and smell of the atrocities were so overwhelmingly horrific that Patton walked over to the side of a barracks, leaned against the wooden wall, and violently vomited. He refused to enter some of the deeper rooms of the camp, stating that if he did, he would not be able to stop himself from physically tearing apart any German soldier he could get his hands on. Eisenhower's face turned the color of ash. The Supreme Commander, normally a man of immense diplomatic restraint, fell completely silent, his jaw locked in a state of cold, absolute fury. It was in this moment, surrounded by the undeniable physical proof of the Holocaust, that Patton realized something fundamental. He realized that this was not a war against a rival nation. This was a war against an ideology of pure, unadulterated evil. And he realized that simply defeating the German army was not enough. The arrogance, the denial, and the smirking ignorance of the Nazi officials and the local German populace had to be physically and psychologically destroyed. Patton issued an order that would echo through the halls of military history. He did not ask for permission from the politicians in Washington. He did not consult the international tribunals or the lawyers drafting the protocols for the occupation. He operated on pure, righteous, and terrifying instinct. Patton ordered his military police to immediately secure the nearby town of Gotha and the surrounding villages. He ordered them to go from house to house, knocking on the doors of the comfortable, well-fed German citizens who claimed they had no idea what was happening in the forest just beyond their backyards. But more importantly, he ordered his troops to round up the captured SS officers, the local Nazi party leaders, and the administrative commanders who were sitting comfortably in American holding pens, demanding their Geneva Convention rights. According to the historical documentation of the United States Army Signal Corps, who were ordered by Eisenhower to film every second of this operation, the scene that unfolded was surreal and biblical in its vengeance. The local German civilians, wearing their Sunday best, clean suits, nice dresses and polished shoes, were marched out of their pristine homes by heavily armed American soldiers. Alongside them were the captured SS officers, stripped of their weapons but still wearing their immaculate uniforms, still carrying that quiet, arrogant defiance. They were marched at gunpoint down the country roads, through the beautiful German countryside, until they reached the gates of Ohrdruf. As the SS officers and the Nazi officials were forced through the gates, the American soldiers did not let them look away. This was not a passive tour. This was a forceful, uncompromising confrontation with reality. Patton's orders were absolute. Make them see it. Make them smell it. Make them understand exactly what they had allowed to happen. American guards forced the SS generals and the local officials to walk directly through the open mass graves. They were forced to step over the rotting, emaciated corpses. They were forced to stand face to face with the surviving prisoners, the very people their ideology had labeled as subhuman. The psychological collapse of the Nazi arrogance was immediate and absolute. The smirk that had been plastered on the faces of the SS interrogations vanished, replaced by a pale, trembling horror. The official historical records note that many of the German civilians and Nazi officials began to openly weep. Some fainted, collapsing into the mud and the filth of the camp, only to be dragged back to their feet by furious American GIs who had zero sympathy for their sudden, fragile morality. Some of the SS officers, confronted with the undeniable, grotesque reality of their master race theories, physically vomited just as Patton had done, unable to process the scale of the atrocity they had been a part of. The American soldiers, operating under Patton's unyielding directive, offered no comfort. They forced the Germans to dig graves. They forced the well-dressed Nazi officials to physically pick up the bodies of the dead with their bare hands and give them a proper, dignified burial. The impact of this forced confrontation was devastating. According to the documented history of the region, the mayor of the town of Gotha, a loyal Nazi party member who had proudly claimed ignorance of the camp, was forced to tour Ohrdruf with his wife. The sight of the stacked bodies, the smell of the death, and the crushing weight of the absolute guilt was so psychologically catastrophic that upon returning to their home that evening, the mayor and his wife wrote a brief suicide note and hanged themselves. The denial had been broken. The reality of what they had done and what they had allowed to happen was too immense for their minds to bear. Type the word truth in the comments right now if you are realizing the absolute brilliance of what General Patton did on that day. He understood that you cannot fight an ideology of lies with paperwork and polite diplomacy. You have to drag the liars into the light and force them to look at the blood on their hands. He understood that if the American army simply cleaned up the camps and buried the dead in secret, the Nazi officials would spend the next 50 years claiming it was all Allied propaganda. They would claim it never happened. Patton and Eisenhower ensured that they could never, ever deny it. Following the tour of Ohrdruf, General Eisenhower sent an urgent, highly classified cable back to General George C. Marshall in Washington, D.C. According to the archives of the War Department, Eisenhower's message was chillingly prophetic. He wrote that he had made the visit deliberately, in order to be in a position to give first-hand evidence of these things if ever, in the future, there developed a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda. Eisenhower ordered every available American journalist, photographer, and congressman in the European theater to be flown directly to the camps. But it was Patton's brutal, localized enforcement of guilt, his absolute refusal to let the SS officers and the local populace look away, that set the standard for how the Allies would handle the psychological denazification of Germany. The SS general who smirked in the interrogation room, confident that he could outsmart the system and hide behind the bureaucracy of war, found himself broken, weeping, and covered in the dirt of a mass grave, forced to acknowledge the ultimate horrifying failure of his entire existence. General George S. Patton, a man often criticized for his own lack of political correctness and his explosive temper, proved in that exact moment to be the supreme moral force of the Allied army. He did not negotiate with evil. He did not debate it. He grabbed it by the throat and forced it to look into the mirror. This is the raw, uncompromising history that you will not find in the sanitized textbooks. This is the reality of what it takes to break the back of a totalitarian nightmare. If this story moved you, if it gave you a deeper understanding of the brutal but necessary actions taken by the men who saved the world from darkness, do not leave this video without hitting the like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of why the truth must always be aggressively defended. Subscribe to the channel and turn on all your notifications because we are going to keep tearing down the myths, exposing the lies, and bringing you the most powerful, unfiltered historical realities that demand to be heard. I will see you in the next one.